Welcome to Freshly Squeezed True Crime, a Florida-only true crime podcast. My name is Sue Haley. There's nothing to it but to get into it, so let's go. Deltona, Florida is a city in Volusia County. It is located on the northern shore of Lake Monroe along the St. Johns River. As of the 2020 census, the population was listed as 93,692. It is not to be confused with Daytona Beach, which is also located in Volusia County. The city is mostly residential and primarily serves as a commuter town for the nearby cities of Orlando and Daytona Beach. On the morning of August 7th, a painter named Christopher Carroll came by at 7 a.m. on the way to work to pick up two men living at 3106 Delford Lane in Deltona. He rang the bell, but nobody answered. From the entrance of the broken doorway, he could see three bodies. He yelled 4 or 5 times and no one answered. He took 2 or 3 steps and could see the bed tipped over in a master bedroom. He backed out and dialed 911. The first Volusia County Sheriff's deputies to arrive found a horrific scene. The house in shambles, music blaring, a deck of cards scattered, a broken knife on the floor, blood splattered on the walls and carpet. Deputies methodically moved room to room, but with every step they found another body, bloodied and mutilated. They tried talking over the screaming stereo, but that only led to more confusion. Finally, deputies shut it off, but the much-needed silence offered little relief from the bloodbath that had taken place. The Deltona Massacre, commonly referred to as the Xbox murders, was a residential murder which occurred on August 6, 2004, at the home located at 3106 Delford Lane. 4 men broke into the home and bludgeoned 6 victims to death. The 4 attackers, apparently inspired by the film Wonderland, tortured and killed 4 men, 2 women, and a dog inside the home, making it the bloodiest mass murder in Volusia County history. Their primary motive for the murders was revenge on Erin Ballinger, who had evicted a squatter, Troy Victorino, from her grandmother's then vacant house, with the secondary motive of recovering an Xbox game console and some clothing that Victorino had left behind. Victorino was able to further motivate his accomplices by pointing out that the attack would likely allow them to kill another person that they were mad at, but that person happened to not be at the home that night. Charged with the murders were Troy Victorino, 27, Robert Cannon, 18, Janone Hunter, 18, and Michael Salas, 18. The victims were Erin Ballinger, 22, Francisco A. Roman, 30, Michelle Ann Nathan, 19, Anthony Vega, 34, Roberto Tito Gonzalez, 28, and Jonathan Gleason, 18. The victims. Erin and Francisco were in a relationship. Michelle and Anthony were also in a relationship. The 4 friends worked together at Burger King and rented the Delford Lane home. Gleason was not a resident at the home. Gonzalez was another co-worker who was spending the night, and the pet dachshund was named George. He belonged to Erin. Originally from New Hampshire, Ballinger moved to Deltona in 2004 to help take care of her grandmother's winter home and to better her opportunities. She worked at Burger King as a cook. Roman, Ballinger's boyfriend and co-worker, grew up in Puerto Rico. He moved to Florida with Erin to finish school and obtain his nursing certification. Anthony, a painter and construction worker, moved to Florida from the Bronx, New York. He moved into the 3-bedroom Delford Lane house 2 weeks prior to the slayings. Michelle, Vega's girlfriend, said she wanted to marry Vega and was very excited about living on her own. Her parents considered her a princess, and she had a tattoo of a princess on her arm. After her death, her father got the same tattoo on his arm. Tito Gonzalez moved from Inwood, Manhattan to Florida in 2004. Unfortunately, that was all the information I could obtain on Mr. Gonzalez. Gleason, originally from Deltona, was the only person in the home who did not work for Burger King. However, he had filled out an application and was planning on going to the restaurant the following morning. He spoke Spanish, Portuguese, and French, and was planning to volunteer at a medical clinic in Africa. People that knew him described him as very intelligent, funny, a loving guy who loved people, and often performed in plays and even dabbled in dance. The attackers shared 2 commonalities: a degree of mental illness and troubled, unstable upbringings. Troy Victorino, the 6'6", 300-pound ringleader of the attack, was on probation at the time of the murder. Victorino had been jailed many times for assault and was incarcerated for 8 of the 11 years prior to the massacre. He had a history of child abuse, ranging from beatings with belt buckles and sexual abuse beginning at the age of 2. Medical experts testified that his scarred mental development and brain damage left him with an inability to control his impulses. Witnesses that grew up near him and his brother would confirm the instability in the house. There were drugs, violence, and abuse, and a general lack of parental unity or of care. Michael Salas's upbringing was on record by Child Protective Services, and he and his brothers were determined to have been exposed to violence, drug use, malnourishment, and abuse such as cigarette burns by their mother. His father, Roberto, died of AIDS when Michael was 9. Michael, who has several diagnosed mental disorders, including bipolar disorder, dropped out of school in the 9th grade. Jerome Hunter was a clinically depressed, mental ill man whose parents were both committed to mental hospitals at the time of the massacre. As early as the age of 3, Hunter would converse with his identical twin brother Jeremy, who had died from pneumonia at 6 months old. His mother did not seek medical attention for his abnormal behavior because she thought it was common and reasoned that in the black culture, she was told when they have a twin brother and they passed away, they always had that relationship with them. So she never thought it was strange. Hunter's rejected August 2008 appeal claimed he had schizophrenia, who was forced into the slayings by Victorino and therefore should have been tried separately. Events that preceded the attack. Troy Victorino and Jerome Hunter were among a group squatting on the Aaron Bellinger's grandparents' property while they were away, which was located at 1590 Providence Boulevard in Deltona. During the trial, Norma and Joseph Reedy, Aaron's grandparents and owners of the home, testified that no one had permission to live in the house in their absence. They lived part-time in Deltona and the rest of the year in Maine. For those who don't know, squatting is the action of occupying an abandoned or unoccupied area of land or building, usually residential, that the squatter does not own, rent, or otherwise have lawful permission to use. Squatting occurs worldwide and tends to occur when people who are poor and homeless find empty buildings or land to occupy for housing. I love going down rabbit holes, and I love doing research. So, in the history of the United States, squatting occurred during the California Gold Rush and World War II. Hoovervilles were homeless camps built across the country during the Great Depression in the 1930s. They were named after Herbert Hoover, who was president of the country at the time. As of 2008, shanty towns again sprang up across the U.S. During the Great Recession of 2007 through 2009, there were increasing number of people squatting foreclosed homes. There were also reports of people re-squatting their own foreclosed home. Okay, so Victorino and Hunter were using the property as a party house. Erin, who had moved to Florida to look after her grandparents' home, had deputies evict the squatters and box of belongings left behind. Erin described to her brother-in-law heading to the vacant house to go swimming one day and finding about 6 people living there. The squatters were kicked out, but deputies were called to their grandparents' home 6 times in 10 days before the killings. The victims reported a tire slashing at their home and threats being made against them. The squatters warned Bellinger that they were going to come back and they were going to beat her with a baseball bat while she was sleeping. Victorino told police that he was friends with Josh Spencer, the grandson of the Readings and cousin to Erin. It should be noted that when Erin and Francisco first moved to Florida, the three were living together. However, 3 weeks later, Josh could not pay his portion and stole from Erin, so he was replaced by Michelle and Anthony, the co-workers from the Burger King. Victorino complains that his belongings were removed from the grandparents' house while he was in jail following a July 29th arrest for battery. Victorino reasons that Erin and her housemates, quote-unquote, robbed him of his Xbox and other belongings. Victorino told others that in the days before the killings, Ballinger showed disrespect to him by calling the police when he tried to get his belongings. Quote, he claimed he was a Latin king. He was this big gang leader, and they basically disrespected him, and he had to deal with them because they couldn't treat a king like this, said witnesses. So, for those that don't know or aren't aware, the Latin Kings were founded in the Humboldt Park area of Chicago in 1954 by Ramon Santos as the Imperials, a Puerto Rican progress movement with the goal of overcoming racial discrimination, with the Latino community facing constant violence from Greek and Italian greaser gangs. The Imperials merged with various other Puerto Rican and Mexican street gangs to form the Latin Kings. They would later, however, devolve into a criminal enterprise operating throughout the United States. There are two umbrella factions: the King Motherland Chicago, also known as King Manifesto and Constitution, and Bloodline, formed in New York City in 1986. All members of the gang identify themselves as Latin Kings. They also identify themselves as the Almighty Latin King Nation, and they make up more than 160 structured chapters operating in 158 cities and 31 states. The membership in Chicago is estimated to be between 20,000 and 35,000. The Chicago faction of the Latin Kings is recognized as one of the largest Hispanic street gangs in the United States after the Sureños and the Norteños, as well as MS-13 and the 18th Street Gang as one of the largest street gangs based in Chicago. Their greatest membership is within the United States and have organized chapters in numerous Latin American countries and European countries. The timeline presented at the time of the trial. The August 6, 2004 murders were the culmination of events that began several days before. On Friday, July 30th, Erin Ballinger contacted police concerning suspicious activity at her grandmother's vacant house on Providence Boulevard in Deltona, without the owner's permission. Victorino and Hunter had recently moved into the home with their belongings. On Saturday, July 31st, Erin again contacted police. This time, she reported that several items were missing from her grandmother's home. Late that night, Victorino appeared at Ballinger's own residence on Telford Lane. He demanded the return of his belongings, which he believed Ballinger had taken from the Providence Boulevard residence. Shortly after leaving Ballinger's residence, early in the morning of August 1st, Victorino contacted law enforcement to report the death of his belongings from the Providence Boulevard residence. The responding officer advised Victorino that he had to provide a list of the stolen property. This angered Victorino and said, "I'll take care of it myself." A short time later, Victorino met Brandon Graham and co-defendants Cannon and Salas, who were in Cannon's Ford Expedition, the SUV. Co-defendant Hunter and several young women were also in the SUV. Victorino told them that Ballinger and the other occupants of the Telford Lane house had stolen his belongings and that he wanted them to go fight Ballinger and the others. According to Graham, Victorino and the occupants of the SUV all went in the SUV to the Telford Lane residence. While Victorino remained in the SUV, the young women went into the residence armed with knives. The young men stood outside holding baseball bats, and Hunter yelled for the occupants to come out and fight. The group left in Cannon's SUV after victim Aro Ramon yelled "Policía." A few days later, on the evening of Wednesday, August the 4th, Victorino went to a park with Graham and the three co-defendants to fight another group. Evidence was presented that some of the members of that group were affiliated with the victims of the Telford Lane and would have knowledge of Victorino's allegedly stolen property. When their foes failed to show up, Victorino and his associates drove back to the house on Fort Smith Boulevard in Deltona, where Victorino and Hunter now lived. As they arrived, however, Victorino spotted the car of the group with which the fight had planned and directed Cannon, who was driving, to chase the car. Victorino fired a gunshot at the fleeing car and then told Cannon to take him home. The following morning, Thursday, August the 5th, Graham, Salas, and Cannon met with Victorino and Hunter at their residence. There, Victorino outlined the following plan to obtain his belongings from Ballinger. Victorino said that he had seen a movie named Wonderland, in which a group of carrying lead pipes ran into a home and beat the occupants to death. Victorino stated that he would do the same at the Telford Lane residence. He asked Graham, Salas, and Cannon if they were, quote, "were down for it," and said to Hunter, "I know you're down for it," because Hunter had belongings stolen as well. All agreed with Victorino's plan. Victorino described the layout of the Telford Lane residence and who would go where. Victorino said that he had particularly wanted to kill Flacco and told the group, "You gotta beat the bitches bad." Graham described Victorino as calm, cool-headed, and very put together. Hunter asked if they should wear masks. Victorino responded, "No, because we're not going to leave any evidence. We're going to kill them all." Victorino and his associates then left in Cannon's SUV to search for bullets for the gun that Victorino fired the previous night. While driving, the group further discussed the plan and decided that each of them needed a change of clothes because their clothes would get bloody. The group dropped Graham off at his friend Christopher Craddock's house. Graham avoided the group's subsequent calls and did not participate in the murders. Now for a quick backstory. Victorino had been arrested July 29, 2004 for assaulting another man, but posted bail the next day. Bridget Burrow, Victorino's probation officer, was notified of the arrest and was required to file a report to the judge detailing the arrest within 48 hours. This report could have sent Victorino back to jail on probation violation. Paul Hayes, Burrow's supervisor, did not receive the report until August the 4th, and a judge did not receive it until August the 6th, after the murder. In addition, Victorino met with Burrow on August the 5th. At this point, Burrow had the legal authority to conduct a quote warrantless arrest on Victorino, and according to department officials, should have done so. Instead, Victorino remains free. Fear motivated Salas and Cannon as Victorino had only met with them a few days earlier and still went along with the plan. The attack. Troy Victorino kicked in the locked front door of the victim's home at 1 a.m. on August 6. Jonathan Gleason, the 17-year-old budding actor and aspiring doctor, was on the recliner when the men stormed the house and was fatally stabbed in the neck by Hunter. Victorino beat Francisco Flaco Ayo Roman with an aluminum bat. Tito Gonzalez was murdered by Hunter, who fatally beat him in the head with the bat and stabbed him multiple times in the chest and stomach. After Erin Ballinger was beaten to death, Troy Victorino sexually abused her body. It is said that she was singled out for the beating so vicious that even dental records were useless in trying to identify her. Anthony Vega was bludgeoned and stabbed in the throat by Victorino in their bedroom near his girlfriend. Michelle and Nathan, the aspiring veterinarian who hoped to join the Army Reserve, hid in the closet until discovered by Hunter, who bludgeoned and stabbed her to death. It should be noted that the four grabbed knives inside the house. Ballinger's pet dog, George, was intentionally stomped to death during the attack. All four wore dark clothes and had scarves on their faces. I know the next section may sound repetitive, but I want to read this section as it was in court. From the doorway to the left, a 17-year-old lay in his recliner, legs draped across an ottoman. His head was crushed and his face, neck, chest, and stomach were stabbed. His wounds show he fought hard. He was a musician and an actor. His name was Jonathan Gleason. A few feet away, a 34-year-old lay on the floor, beaten in the face. He had left New York City to escape trouble and violence. His name was Anthony Vega. Around the corner, past the closet, Vega's girlfriend was in the bedroom. She was stabbed behind the ear and in her right breast and hip. Others in the home had been mutilated after they died, but this 19-year-old, whose father called Princess, hung on for quite a while. While her heart continued to beat, they slit her throat 3 times. That's all she could take. Her name was Michelle Ann Nathan. Across the hall, lying in the doorway of the next bedroom, was a 28-year-old. Like Vega and Gleason, he too fought. He also suffered a similar fate. He was stabbed at least 15 times in his chest and 10 times in the stomach, but he died from being beaten in the head. His name was Roberto Gonzalez. His friends called him Tito. No single room held more death than the master bedroom. Next to a flip mattress lay a 30-year-old from Puerto Rico naked. Just one head wound stretched from ear to his forehead. Teeth were knocked out, his throat cut. His name was Francisco Ello Roman. His friends called him Flaco. On the other side of the room, a limp brown figure lay. It was the dog, George. Someone had stomped his snout so many times it killed him. He lay next to his master, her legs half inside the bathroom, naked, body halfway out. It's here, Flaco's 22-year-old girlfriend offered up her final breath after suffering the most abuse of the 6 victims. Even after she died from the beatings and the cuts, her body had been sexually desecrated. Her connection to another home had sparked trouble. She called the police after finding a man's belongings in her grandmother's home. There was a run-in, and then another, and then another, and then another. The man grew angrier and angrier. He wanted his stuff back. He wanted revenge. She also didn't want to fight. She wanted it to end. and this is how it ended. Her name was Erin Ballinger. She was raped with a baseball bat. Two of the victims were there by chance. Gleason was staying temporarily and intended to move out Tuesday. Gonzalez was working with Nathan at a Burger King restaurant and spent the night to be able to get up early with Vega for a painting job. Victorino found his things boxed up in the victim's house and took them after the killings. Brandon Graham, 17, will later testify that he was with all four men when the plot to go to the house in Deltona and kill all the victims was discussed by Victorino. Victorino has seen the 1988 movie Wonderland, which includes a scene of people being beaten by pipes. He said he wanted to get a group of people to do the same. Graham said, when asked if they needed a mask, Victorino said, "We are not going to leave any evidence. We are going to kill them all." At the time of the killings, Graham said he left town because I, quote, wanted to get away from them, end quote. 2 days after the slayings, Graham called police. Graham's name was published in the Orlando Sentinel, which placed Graham and his entire family in immediate danger of being murdered and/or physically harmed to prevent him from testifying at trial. On Saturday, August 7th, at about 1 p.m., Troy Victorino was arrested on an outstanding violation of probation warrant at gunpoint at Fort Smith Boulevard, less than 5 miles from where the murders took place. After a 15-minute standoff, Jerome Hunter was with him and was not arrested at the time but brought out for questioning. Initially, Hunter denied involvement with the murders. After being Mirandized and signing a written waiver of his rights, he admitted that he was present and participated in the murders. Hunter stated that in the early morning hours of August 6th, he and his co-defendants, Victorino, Cannon, and Salas, drove to the victim's residence in a white Ford Expedition operated by Cannon. Per Hunter, he and the co-defendants were dressed in black and wore scarves over their faces. All four men were armed with aluminum bats. He described everything I mentioned above and stated he was the first to leave the residence once the murders were done, with Victorino being the last to exit the home. He accurately described the crime scene, including the location of some of the bodies and the manner of death in detail that was only known to the investigators and to perpetrators. He was then arrested and charged. At the time of his arrest, Victorino would not give his name, but that was fine because 3 neighbors who watched officers take him away in handcuffs identified him as Troy M. Victorino, 27 of Deltona. According to the Florida Department of Corrections records, Victorino, like I said before, has spent 8 of 11 years in prison, 6 for beating a man so severely he needed 18 hours of reconstructive surgery. Victorino pummeled Michael Simpson for 4 to 6 minutes, shoving a walking cane down his throat and knocking out 3 of his teeth. The reason for the violence? Victorino wanted his souped-up Honda CRX. Behind bars, Victorino was still notorious. He was repeatedly disciplined in prison for fighting and generally being, quote, a security threat. State documents would show later. One time, in 2000, he was accused of hitting an inmate in the face with a lock after calling him a snitch. Locked up, he still had power. He was the leader of a Latin Kings gang, state records show. He was released in January 1996 after serving 2 years for charges including grand theft motor vehicle, arson, and burglary. The year after his release, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for aggravated battery and grand theft of a motor vehicle. He was released from prison in October 2003 and was serving a 7-year probation sentence when this crime occurred. Trial and sentencing. All 4 men were charged with the murders and made their first appearance in Daytona Beach on August 9, 2004. They were denied bond and appointed public defenders. The month-long jury trial was moved from Volusia due to concerns that media coverage made a fair jury trial impossible, and instead took place 85 miles away at the Richard O. Watson Judicial Center in St. Augustine, Florida, after 2 years of preparation. The $1.5 million in legal defense fees were the 7th Circuit record. Prosecutors showed graphic photographs of gaping wounds on the abdomens, necks, hips, and other parts of the victims. They also showed a 5-minute video of the inside of the house, including the bodies. Court records state the following. Around midnight on August the 5th, a witness saw Victorino, Salas, Cannon, and Hunter near the murder scene on Telford Lane. Cannon, now a state witness, testified that he and Salas went because they were afraid Victorino would kill them if they did not. Cannon further testified that he, Victorino, Hunter, and Salas entered the victim's home on the night of the murders armed with baseball bats. By the way, the front door had been kicked in with such force that it broke the deadlock and left a footwear impression on the door. Footwear impressions were also recovered from 2 playing cards, a bed sheet, and a pay stub. All of the impressions were linked to Victorino's lug boots. Furthermore, DNA testing linked blood stains on Victorino's lug boots to several of the victims. A knife handle, a bloody knife blade were also recovered from the crime scene. Cannon's SUV was seized. From it, officers recovered a pair of sunglasses containing victim Admiral Roman's fingerprint, and in addition, glass fragments found in the vehicle were consistent with glass from a broken lamp at the crime scene. When questioned by officers, Salas admitted to being at the crime scene on the night of the murders and stated that Cannon drove there with Victorino, Hunter, and Salas. Salas also described his role in the murders and told officers where the bats had been discarded at a retention pond. Based on that information, law enforcement authorities recovered 2 bats from the pond and 2 bats from the surrounding trees. The 2 bats recovered from the surrounding trees contained DNA material that would link to at least 4 of the victims. At trial, Victorino testified in his defense. He admitted that he believed that Ballinger had taken his property from the Providence Boulevard residence. However, he denied meeting Graham, Cannon, or Salas at the residence on August the 5th, testifying instead that he was at work. He further denied committing the murders and offered an alibi, that he was at a nightclub on the night of the murders. 2 friends testified on behalf of Victorino and corroborated his alibi. Hunter and Salas also testified in their defense. Each described his role in the murders and corroborated the other's testimony and evidence offered at trial, including the evidence of the meeting at which Victorino planned the murders and the agreement to participate. They further testified that Victorino attempted to establish an alibi by making an appearance at the nightclub. On July 25, 2006, all 4 men were found guilty by a jury of their peers, 7 females and 5 males. On August 2, 2006, 7th Circuit Judge William Parsons sentenced Victorino and Hunter to death by lethal injection, and Cannon and Salas to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Victorino was found guilty of first-degree murder of all 6 victims, abuse of a dead human body, armed burglary of a dwelling, and animal cruelty. At trial, he claimed he was drinking at a bar when the murders occurred. Victorino contended that the size 12 bloody boots presented at the trial were his, but someone must have stolen them from him before committing the murders. Hunter was also found guilty of first-degree murder of all 6 victims, conspiring to commit aggravated battery, tampering with physical evidence, abuse of a dead human body, and armed burglary of a dwelling. He closed his eyes as the first guilty verdict was read and stared straight ahead as he was further condemned to death. Hunter was at one point the youngest inmate on death row in Florida. A September 2008 appeal by Hunter was rejected. Cannon pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 life terms without parole for the murders, life for armed burglary of a dwelling with a weapon, 5 years for conspiracy to commit aggravated battery, murder, armed burglary of a dwelling, and tampering with physical evidence. 15 years each for 5 counts of abuse of a dead human body, and 5 years for cruelty to an animal. By the way, this was after he pled guilty to the October before. In exchange for testifying for the prosecution, he would have received 1 life sentence instead of 6. Well, guess he fucked that up. Salas was found guilty of first-degree murder of all 6 victims, conspiring to commit aggravated battery, tampering with physical evidence, and armed burglary of a dwelling. After the sentencing, Judge Parsons said, "You have not only forfeited your right to live among us, you have forfeited your right to live at all." In 2016, the Florida Supreme Court ruled that jury recommendations for death sentence must be unanimous, but the closest jurors had come to a unanimous death recommendation for Victorino and Hunter was 10-2. In 2017, Circuit Judge Randall Rowe III cited the Supreme Court decision in overturning the death sentences against the 2 men. Victorino and Hunter were carrying out their sentences in a 1-person cell on death row at the Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. However, On June 14, 2017, the Daytona Beach News Journal reported that Victorino and Hunter were to receive new sentencing hearings due to a state Supreme Court decision. Prosecutors decided to seek death sentences for the two men again, and both Hunter and Victorino awaited their hearings. The new law allowed juries to recommend death with an 8-4 vote, but Judge Randall Rowe, presiding, ruled this hearing started before the new law was passed, so the jury would have to find it unanimous in order to recommend death. Despite Florida's new 8-4 jury death recommendation law, Rowe has ruled the jury can't rely on that. They will have to be unanimous in a death penalty recommendation, or the convicted killers will be sentenced to life without parole. Prosecutors faced an uphill battle to get the death penalty due to the new penalty phase trial. The original law in 2006 said prosecutors only needed a majority of jurors to get the death penalty, but now jurors must be unanimous. And if just one juror recommends life for one of the killers, the judge might follow the recommendation and sentence that person to life in prison. But if a jury unanimously recommends death for one or both of the murderers, Judge Rowe can sentence the person to either death or to life. On Wednesday, May 17, 2005, during resentencing, a jury overwhelmingly recommended that Victorino and Hunter be sentenced to death for the 2004 slayings. The legislative response. In response to the Deltona Massacre, the Florida legislature proposed a bill that would add additional, quote, risks to public hearings for probation violators with violent histories. State law allowed but did not require probation officer Richard Burrow to arrest Troy Victorino, a violent felon who was facing a battery charge and thus probation violation. Burrow opted to let Victorino leave his office and to ask for an arrest warrant the next day, which gave Victorino the opportunity to commit the killings. The bill SB 146, which passed on February 23, 2007, seeks to close this loophole by addressing felony probation and other community control violations with the new designation of the Violent Felony Offender Special Concern, VFOSC. Such an offender cannot be released from jail until a court hearing determines whether supervision was violated. If supervision is found to have been violated, the court must make a written finding as to whether the offender is a danger to the community. If determined to be a danger to the community, the violator may have his probation revoked and be sentenced up to the statutory maximum or longer if permitted by law. The bill subsequently amends sections 921 and 948 of the Florida statutes. As a result, Paul Hayes and Richard Burrow were fired on August 9th, along with two top administrators. Victorino, DC number 898405, and Hunter, DC number V26165, are both on death row. Cannon, C00095, can be found at Sumter CI, and Salas, C00014, can be found at CRF East. Thank you, and that's all we have for this week. This is Freshly Squeezed True Crime. Thank you. You can find us on fstcpodcast.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and listen to us wherever you listen to your podcast. This episode was squeezed to perfection. Goodbye.